anybody can.
Did they give you your file?
Oh, yeah, they do. No, I mean, that fundraiser.
When you were listening to McMaster's State of the State, was the message, as your governor, I've done nothing and I plan to do even less in the future? Is that kind of what he said?
Well,
I'm sitting there with $35,000 in debt.
You talk about a guy that's
Mike, it might have something to do
cautious
with the fact that you're one of the
and afraid of
conservatives
the
in the Senate, not just of your caucus.
That could have been, I guess.
Could have been it, yeah.
That's probably had
You know,
more to do with it.
maybe go talk to somebody else about fundraising, you know.
So, yeah, I will check with Senator
He
Matthews.
thinks he's got it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting,
way to
there might
lose
be a
an
rule
election,
that if you
too, I
switch, just back and forth, they could max out to you again and again and again and again and again. Yeah,
Oh, that would be interesting to see somebody do
nobody's
that.
ever done it, but, I mean, hey,
I don't know this Willis woman who,
thought about it.
from Florence, who
Yeah, can't do
declared
it
for the Democratic nomination.
Well, you know, our husband,
You think it might hurt your primary?
maybe.
Oh, yeah, that's where she is.
Well,
I see.
That should be interesting.
didn't know that
Get to go to beautiful scenic.
This is really nice.
You know,
This is kind of.
Well, at least I'd have a friend up there that I could call.
It should be.
Oh,
I just love to know how we're gonna talk for 2 hours. That's a
Oh, is
really,
it 2 hours?
that's a really long time.
I don't think we're gonna probably talk for 2
Yeah.
hours.
I really need to get, meet the city of Clemson about 8:30, 8:45.
Yeah. Well,
I must stick
past time.
I hate to start.
Yeah.
Okay, I think he's about ready to go.
Now, this isn't about marijuana. Go ahead.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My name is Marcurius Bird. I am the president of the American Constitution Society for Law and Policy here at the University of South Carolina School of Law, and I welcome you to tonight's event. Briefly, before we get started with the main event, I would like to just kind of introduce what the American Constitution Society is all about. For those of you who are familiar with Justice Scalia and the Federalist Society, they present a vision of the Constitution that is a bit more conservative, more reserved in its policies. The American Constitution Society was founded to combat those trends and work towards a more progressive view of society. And we symbolic justice would be someone more along the lines of Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ginsburg. We work at the student chapter level here at USC. We put on about 20 events throughout the school year. I believe it's the highest amount of events out of any of the student organizations at the school. What we are working for is to do things like we are doing tonight, is looking at the laws, looking at the policies that we have available, and looking for solutions or ways we can change them so that we can have a more progressive society that works for all of us in all of our best interests. And with that, I will introduce our speakers for tonight. Starting from my right, we have Representative Gilder Cobb-Hunter from Orangeburg County. Sitting next to her, we have John Kringle from the South Carolina Progressive Network. Towards the middle, we have Senator Mike Fanning from Fairfield County. Here, next to on my left, we have Judge Gary Clary from Pickens County. Next to him, we have seated Ms. Lynn Teague from the League of Women Voters. And last but not least of our speakers, we have Senator William Timmons from Greenville County. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak to y'all. If any of you would like to learn more about the American Constitution Society, please speak to me after tonight's event. And at this point, I will turn it over to our moderator, Brett Bursey.
Thank you, Mayor Curious. And I want to point out that Judge Clary is also a representative, and that I told him, and apparently a lot of people agree with me, they were introducing him in the State House now as a judge, and it's a better honorific than representative now. One of the things that we're here to talk about tonight is why are people having such a bad attitude about politics? And our conclusion is that money is having a deleterious effect on politics. It's not a new idea. And the Progressive Network, of which I am the director, it was started 21 years ago with the help of Gilda Cobb-Hunter and Representative Joe Neal, who's passed away now. And we've been in the trenches for a long time, and that we've had some issue with whether we're partisan or bipartisan or not, and that we're really anti-partisan because we agreed with George Washington. In his farewell speech, he warned America, he said, don't start parties. If you do, they'll fight until you end up with two of them. And then they will fight for money and control and forget whose interests they're supposed to be serving. Well, now we're paying a little bit of attention to that, and we've got this wonderful new day where we've got two Republican legislators working with two Democratic legislators on issues that are meaningful to the people and not necessarily some narrow partisan interest or the money that funds that interest. And so this is a great day for bipartisanship. And I do want to recognize that Representative Wendy Brawley has joined us. Yeah. And Representative Brawley, for those of you that don't know, she has taken on a major task of following in the footsteps of Representative Joe Neal. Thank you, Wendy. And I want to also thank Kyle Kriminger, who's the co-chair of our C3. Y'all need to know that we have a bipartisan operation, which is the C3, it's the education fund. We refer to it as the Research and Policy Institute. It's the only thing in South Carolina that I'm aware of that's actually spending a lot of effort, a lot of time, figuring out why things are wrong and what to do about it. And Shannon Herron.
Kyle to stand.
Who?
Kyle to stand so people can see him.
Oh, I'm sorry, I told him to stand up. And Shannon, stand up. And Shannon and Kyle, Shannon's the secretary. They're both also graduates of the Majeska School, which is probably the greatest thing I've ever worked on, to be able to institutionalize the fighting spirit of the great woman, Majeska Simpkins, who, if you don't know, visit our website and click on Majeska School. And Marjorie Hammock, another one of our co-chairs of the C3, the nonpartisan group. The paparazzi up there is Becky Robbins, our communications director, who has the awesome task of trying to make me seem literate, and I have the benefit of being her husband. And so there are other officers in the room. Daniel Deweese is the regional coordinator for the local area. And so what we want to do tonight is to at least acknowledge the great leap forward of having people discussing the types of problems that have become departisanized, that the opportunity to make headway, I think John Krangle will point out that we only get it almost generationally when there's a scandal. We can actually make some changes. And so we want to start out talking about this first bill on your sheet here, the yellow sheet that I think all of you have. I hope. If you don't, raise your hand. We'll get you one. And the special election restitution bill, Senator Fanning was the sponsor, and I'll let him talk about it, and then people can comment on it. John Krangle was involved. Senator Fanning, why did you introduce this bill?
Well, thank you, Brett. And can we give Brett a round of applause for you know, the bad news is to quote Brett Bursey, we only have a chance to do these things when we have scandal. The good news is we live in South Carolina and we have that opportunity and specifically tying it to this piece of legislation is we continue to have folks that we elect, that we give our trust to. They ask for our trust and we give them their trust, and they commit ethics violations and commit crimes, and they cause themselves to be removed from office. And as a result of that behavior, we have to have a special election to replace them. And that special election costs money. And so one of the reasons, many of you know, I am a former high school history teacher, and one of my biggest concerns is that we have only fully funded base student costs 8 times in 40 years, and we don't supposedly have the money to do it. We don't have the money to do it because we're spending your tax dollars on special elections to replace people that committed crimes and are leaving office. And so we introduced this bill that would require, if you committed a crime while in office that involved you removing office, that you have to fund the state back or refund the state the cost of the special election to replace you.
Thank you, Mike. John, I understand that you've had some experience with restitution for legislators or politicians going to jail.
10 years ago, when South Carolina Treasurer Thomas Ravenel was convicted of felony cocaine possession, I petitioned sentencing Judge Joe Anderson in federal court to order Ravenel to pay the entire cost of the special session of the General Assembly that was called to replace him. And the amount was $28,668. And when I asked Judge Anderson to do that, he called me up at home. It's unusual to be called by a federal judge at 7:30 in the morning, but he called me up and he said, John, I don't know whether I can do this or not. I've had my clerk researching the issue for the last couple of days, and she can find no precedent where this has ever been done at the federal or at the state level. And I said, well, your clerk hasn't found any precedent that says you can't do it. And he said, no, and he said, I want to do it. So when the hearing came around, he called me out of the gallery to make the argument that Thomas Ravenel should have to pay the restitution. And Thomas Ravenel's attorney, Bart Daniel, when asked by the judge about my petition, stood up and said, we have no objection. So Thomas Ravenel paid the amount in full to the South Carolina Treasury. That's the precedent for what we're doing. I talked to Senator Fanning about it. He seemed very interested. He sponsored the legislation, and I think it has a prospect of being passed either this session or in the future. We're talking about substantial amounts of money. For example, if Rick Quinn is busted out of office and a special sale, it'll cost $53,000 to the county and the state to replace him. If it's a senator, because Senate districts are much larger, 110,000 constituents, it would cost $125,000 to hold a special election. It's Senator Fanning's view and my view that taxpayers should not have to pay the cost of the misconduct and betrayal of public trust inflicted by corrupt public officials in South Carolina.
And if I can, and we know, no, first applaud that, absolutely. We know, I mean, we don't have to remind you of the examples, you know the examples, but in addition to that, my colleague and mentor in the House, we thank Representative Gilda Cobb-Hunter for also introducing the same piece of legislation, a companion bill in the House as well. But remember, we have just this session 3 folks in the General Assembly that could have some application. Over the last years, we've had several folks, but y'all, we've had agriculture commissioners running cockfighting rings. We've had 3 lieutenant governors in a span of 5 years. But this bill is not just focused on state officials and legislators. This is talking about local folks all across the state. And so we've had sheriffs running dogfighting rings and whatnot that have left office. And each one of those costs millions of dollars when added together that could be used to reduce tax rates or to meet some of the needs that we have. And so,
Thank you, Mike.
I'm sorry.
That
meant shut up, Mike.
One of the interesting things is, one of the interesting coincidences is that of the 3 legislators that have been indicted most recently, one of them is John's senator and one of them is my House member. And so we're kind of close to this in a number of ways. And that Judge Anderson, who was the federal judge that actually sentenced Tommy Ravenel to restitution, called our office and apologized because his ethics people said he can't testify, but that he would send his opinion. Judge Clary, what do you think about this bill, and what chances does it have of passing?
Well, I think it's much like a lot of the bills that we have here. We're in the 2nd year of a 2-year session, and we have this little thing called SCANA that is
Amen.
just dominating everything. And I think realistically, in looking at a number of these bills, and I'll get to that question that you asked me in just a moment, this is going to be a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint. And I think it requires a great deal of patience, and that's one thing that I've had to learn since I came to the General Assembly. You know, as a judge, I was in charge of that courtroom, and I could, you know, we started when I wanted to, we finished when I wanted to, we went to lunch when I wanted to. The only thing that would stop me was not having a court reporter. And so, you know, I'm very cognizant of that. And I think the thing that I've learned now in my 4th year in the General Assembly, that, you know, it takes a great deal of patience to be involved in this process. And we're talking about a major shift, monumental change here. I also like what John talked about, you know, with when we have issues that come up in corruption. I was elected as a circuit judge right after lost trust. Prior to that time, in order to be a circuit judge in South Carolina, you had to be a member of the General Assembly. And there was a wave of us that had never served in the General Assembly that were elected. And I was actually running when members of the General Assembly could still technically run while they were serving. And, you know, I really feel like what I want is to have much like in a trial, I want a level playing field with whatever we do. And, you know, judges operate under different rules of ethics. It's very stringent. And that's one reason that I have introduced some of the bills that I have. I've built, and I told the Speaker when I came to the House in 2015, you know, I've spent over 40 years trying to establish a reputation of honesty, integrity, and strong ethics. And I'm not going to do anything here that's going to interfere with that. And that's the reason why I firmly believe that the bills that you see on this sheet, and I don't know that we'll get to discuss all of them tonight, are so important. And I think that it's interesting when you talk about Judge Anderson, who's a friend of mine. He's a Clemson grad and has been a friend of mine a long time. His son's a constituent of mine up in Clemson. Federal judges have a great deal of latitude in the decisions that they make. South Carolina circuit judges have a great deal of discretion and latitude in the decisions that they make. So I think that the precedent is there in federal court, and it's going to take someone like Judge Anderson to step outside the box and maybe make this a part of restitution until we get an actual law in place.
Thank you, sir. That's an interesting point. He's talking about using the outside force to make inside change. One of the precepts that we organize the Progressive Network around is that we can't change the inside from the inside. We have to have a force from the outside that gets involved in the inside with enough power and enthusiasm to change it. So we could change the restitution thing simply by petitioning and showing up in front of a court hearing where the person is being sentenced that we're having to pay the tax money for their replacement. Is there any other comment from the right side of the bench here on that bill? It was
Absolutely. No, well, let me start out by saying, when I first decided to run for office, I had spent 4 years as a prosecutor, 5 years as a business owner, and I decided to run for office because I was furious at how ineffective government was. I was furious at how all of my businesses, the biggest problem to succeeding was not, can I get people to join my gym? Did I make a good decision on a property investment? Whatever it was government. And so I got looking at what was going on, and I came to the conclusion that Columbia's broken, and that was my campaign slogan, easy enough. And I ran on term limits because I think that people generally forget why they run after a couple decades. I ran on ethics reform because I, like everyone in this room, thinks we have a problem, and that's pretty clear. It's very clear now. It was very clear to me 2.5 years ago. But we have to do something. And it's interesting to me that everyone in this room thinks that we have a problem, and most people in the state think we have a problem, and they think that Columbia is corrupt and or corrupting. But generally speaking, their elected representative in the Senate of their House is not the problem. So there's a dichotomy there that we really need to work through as a society. I mean, either everybody's wrong, some people are wrong, or, you know, we got to do something. And so, you know, this approach to restitution is one of many things that we could do. I think that it's kind of a no-brainer. I actually talked to Senator Fanning about making it merely optional, because for somebody like Thomas Ravenel, I mean, $28,000, that's under his couch cushion. But it might be his couch cushion. But
Might be his couch.
But, you know, even if we just statutorily give the judge discretion to do something like that, and it could be on a case-by-case basis, that's a no-brainer. And I don't know how many people have co-sponsored this bill. I think I told them I would. I don't know if my name's on it yet, but I don't think we're going to do it. I don't think it's going to get done. I would actually handicap it at about a 10% chance. And that's because we have 38 days left, give or take a day or two. And it's because inevitably there's people within the body that don't want changes. So I'm all for it in whatever capacity. I think that most of the things on this list are great ideas, but as a society, we really need to figure out why we all view that Columbia is broken, and yet most people don't view that their legislator is part of the problem.
Thanks, Senator. Judge?
You know, I think that Senator Timmons has hit on something very interesting, and quite frankly, I'm a little shocked that we've been able to talk this much and Gilda Cobb has not. But thank you very much for allowing me to do that, because she's my dear friend. I've known her for a long time, and I was marveling at that just a few minutes ago. But I think Senator Timmons has hit on something really interesting. What we're talking about in these ethics bills do not represent a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. There are people in both parties that are entrenched against this. And so don't just think that this is something that the Republicans are opposed to or the Democrats. It's across the board, ladies and gentlemen. And until we come to grips with the fact that we do have a true problem with revealing sources of income, not just income, sources of income, and a litany of other things, then, you know, we're going to continue to have this problem. And unfortunately, South Carolina has such a tortured history over this. It's a lot to overcome. But I'm convinced that, once again, this year, maybe not. But for those of us who are fortunate enough to come back, you know, Senator Timmons is talking about term limits. I mean, look at me, I'll term limit myself. I don't buy green bananas. That's the way that I look at it. So, you know, while I'm here, I want to try to work on these really important issues.
Representative Cobb-Hunter, do you have something to say before we move on to
Well,
Senator
if I
Timmons' bill on tax reform?
Brett?
Well, first let me just thank all of y'all for taking time out to come. It's really important that we talk about money and its role in politics. It's an honor to be up here with my colleagues, and I really want to emphasize the point that has been made up there on two levels. One, that this is a bipartisan effort, and number two, the opposition will be bipartisan as well. And I want to thank the Progressive Network for always staying focused, for always consistently throughout the years doing the work that a lot of people talk about, but the network has been consistently doing. In terms of the bill that Senator Fanning has sponsored in the House, I have filed a companion bill he's filed it in the Senate, I filed a companion bill in the House. It just seems to me to be a no-brainer that if you are convicted, if you are the reason that a special election is needed, then I think you ought to pay for it. because not everybody is a Thomas Ravenel with that money on the couch or as the couch. So particularly when we think of local elected officials, that may be a real tough row to hoe. So I'm thinking on the House side, I'd like to offer that language that Senator Timmons just suggested. I think it ought to be up to the discretion, or the judge should have discretion about who and when to make someone pay for an election or restitution.
Thank you, Representative Cobb-Hunter. That's what subcommittees are for. Lynn?
Yes, I started working on ethics for the League of Women Voters at the State House in 2012. And one of the first things that happened was someone in my book club, who happened to be the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, said you're never going to get any external investigation of complaints against legislators. That's the one part of the puzzle you'll never get. Well, we didn't get it in as pure a form as we would like, but we got it in 2016. It happened. It took 4 years. You know, the fact that we can work on these issues this year means we can educate the public about them, we can bring awareness, we can have people start knowing what to say to their own representatives, to their own senators, about what they expect of them and what they will be thinking about when they go in the voting booth the next time. All of this groundwork has to be laid, and it takes time, but you can eventually get there. You might not get to perfection, but you get a lot more than you had in the first place. And that's where we've been, I think, all along on ethics. We get a part of the pie, we try for another part. Fortunately, the League of Women Voters has been around for 98 years, and it took us 10 years just to get women onto state juries in this state. And I was married before women could sit on a state jury in South Carolina. So
Thank you, Lynn.
you
Professor
just keep
Krinkle,
at it.
take this home.
I'd just like to indicate that 3 weeks ago, I petitioned Judge Carmen Mueller, who has jurisdiction over the Rick Quinn case, to order restitution for the special election called to replace him if he's convicted. There is some question about his plea right now, but anyhow, I'm asking Judge Mullen, there's a statute that provides that judges can order restitution to victims. And my argument is taxpayers of South Carolina are the victims, that's 5 million people, and therefore they're entitled to restitution.
Thank you, John. We're going to move on to Senator Timmons' bill on filing tax returns. And that, Senator Timmons, it seems that you only wanted tax returns after somebody's been accused of something.
Okay, so before I ran for office, I was all for show your tax returns, everybody should be able to see them. And then I got elected. And hold on, it gets better. And I wasn't able to actually earn an income for a whole year. So I actually had a really massive loss on my tax returns. And I don't think it would be fair for somebody to then use that against me and say, well, look at Senator Timmons, he can't even make any money. You know, we shouldn't put him in office. And somebody would say that. And I would just be like, average my last 5, please. Don't just use my first year. So anyways, long story short, I have revised my view of how to disclose tax returns. And ultimately, let's back up for a second. So somebody says legislator X is doing something he shouldn't do. The tools to investigate him outside of criminal allegations are fairly limited. We do not disclose, well, the House does not disclose their bank records for their campaign accounts, and nobody has any access to tax returns, unless there's a criminal investigation that's under subpoena. So my whole view, and really S7, 64, 65, and 66, is to give the Ethics Commission and the people in charge of investigating the tools and the resources to do their job. So the way that I structured most of these was to try to find a way to get people to let me get them through and make them law. So I actually wouldn't be opposed to the State Ethics Commission just having total access, but people say, well, it's partisan. And so I, in anticipation of that argument, countered that, and I said it's 2/3 majority of the members of the State Ethics Commission. So I think that this should satisfy most people's
Well, thanks, Senator Timmons.
heartburn. Hold on, it should satisfy most people's heartburn, but I'll go ahead and say this again. It's a non-starter. It's done. I'll tell you right now, S-764 will not get a subcommittee, and we will not get a vote of any kind on it. I can try to pull it out, but it's done. It's dead. So, I mean, it's sad, but I'm going to be honest with you. We got to. Anyways, doom and gloom over here. Sorry.
Senator Timmons, before what he's doing, he was prosecuting people for financial malfeasance, so he knows what he's talking about. Does anybody want to argue with Senator Timmons on this bill, or we want to move on?
Well, just, no, two points. I'm certainly not going to argue with my seatmate in the Senate.
I didn't know you were that cozy.
But two things. Number one is you unfortunately can't make it too outreaching if you're going to get it passed, and so I think that is the key to it. But I agree with Senator Timmons. I don't know what we have to hide. I mean, if you look at my tax return, you might feel sorry for me and more likely to give me a campaign donation. So I question the motivation of folks that are wanting to hide it, and I actually appreciate the limited nature in this, because that is about the only way we got a shot of maybe getting a hearing, is tailoring it, because what Congressman Timmons is attempting is he's attempting to tailor it to where we would have a justified need. And I think, and that's your point behind it, is the only time we really would be using this is if there was a need to look at a tax return. And in a state that moves as slow as molasses, I appreciate probably scaling it back to get it passed.
Well, thank you. I'm going to recognize Terry Alexander, Representative Terry Alexander. From the great city of Florence. Thank you for coming, sir. And your bill is up next, Senator Timmons, about lobbyists having to register that don't get compensated. And I'm going to ask John Kringle, who's a lobbyist that doesn't get compensated, what he thinks about your bill that's going to require him to, well, it's going to require the Progressive Network to pay a $100 principal. The principals have to pay money. John has to pay money. And I know people like Dwight Drake and other people that are making 6- and 7-digit figures that pay the same amount of money as poor John's going to have to pay. John, is that a fair bill?
Let's ask Senator Timmons what he thinks.
Senator Timmons, what's the deal with that?
Again, doom and gloom over here. It's already dead, but I'll tell you about it. Really, the whole idea is that we had a system in the legislature where a fairly sophisticated fraudulent scheme to generate revenue for the Quins was technically, well, I'll argue it wasn't illegal. I mean, they had, there's a lot of nuances to this, but ultimately they went and got ethics opinions and all this nonsense, but it was a very sophisticated way to generate millions and millions of dollars. So the purpose of the bill was to catch them and catch other people that are doing the same thing to a lesser degree. But, you know, just because you're asking a legislator to vote for something doesn't mean that you are not making just as much, if not more money, and you have just as much, if not greater ability to influence legislation, whether that is tax credits for special projects, whether it is, how we funnel money for infrastructure and, or, some massive tax break for some massive corporation. And, there's just a lot of people that are engaging in the arena, and we need transparency, we need accountability. So there are some flaws to S-765, and I guess the idea was more transparency, more accountability. Just let the public know what's going on and who's making tons of money off of this process, because that's the only way we're going to fix anything, by shining light into dark spots of this process.
Well, is this a sliding scale here based on lobbyist income? What are we looking
Well, yes, my income, I'm often offered double or triple my salary from the League of Women Voters, because no matter how many times you multiply something by 0, you still get 0, and yet I register. And that is because the League lobbies so much on ethics and transparency and government accountability that we thought it would be a good gesture for me to do that. to paying the 104. It is 104 because we pay the processing fee. And filling out the biannual reports, if you're actually representing a citizen group, it is not a big deal. It takes you almost no time at all to put those zeros on the report. You know, the league is volunteer steam, and so people say, well, this would be so hard on citizen groups. Well, we're an absolutely classic citizen group that is really rotten at fundraising and generally just operates on volunteer power a lot of the time, trying to get better at fundraising. But, you know, what I would say is it's not that big a burden to ask that people do register and report. And if you are, in fact, just a citizen group wanting to make your voice heard, you know, there should be some level at which you're not having to register. But if you're there all the time like I am, people have a right to know who I am and who I'm representing.
Senator Fan, you have a right to know who that lady is?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. As a freshman senator, I was inundated with folks that were always coming in to tell me what to do, and then I go home and my wife tells me what to do. But in the General Assembly, I mean, I knew who my wife was, but in General Assembly, I had no idea where the person was coming from. And those that were registered lobbyists, at least I had a way of knowing what they were advocating for, who was paying their salary, and that allowed me to have some information that helped me make a decision based on what they're giving me. But not having that information on some people, it made it hard for me to know what to do with the information. But also, I don't know if you all remember, a couple weeks ago we had a hearing on the nuclear issue. And Dominion was there, and they were telling us they're the only game in town, and we couldn't do anything. Some of you are nodding your heads, you were there. And I don't know if you remember what I did at the beginning of that committee is that I said, I want to thank this huge audience here today. We were in an auditorium that held, I don't know, 120 people. And I said, I want to begin the meeting by thanking all of the folks that came out here today. In fact, if you were a lobbyist, but I didn't stop there. I don't know if you all noticed that. I didn't just say if you're a lobbyist. I said, were paid for or in any way affiliated with an energy company, would you please stand and let you applaud you? And then once they stood, I said, this is what we're up against and whatnot. But if you know, to Senator Congressman Timmons' point, is that I couldn't just say lobbyists, because there were lots of folks there that were paid money by not just Dominion, but there were other power companies present as well that weren't registered lobbyists, and that needed to be brought to light. That's why I love the bill that Senator Timmons introduces, is it's a way of bringing things into light. We say that we're in the state of South Carolina because we believe in increased accountability and transparency, but if we don't do this, we're making it impossible for senators, House members, and the public to know who is truly behind the major decisions that take place here.
Just very briefly.
Hey, you know, I think intellectually, this is a no-brainer. And intellectually, there probably should be a sliding scale on the registration fee. But, you know, folks, at the end of the day, we're talking about politics. And I think that when we talk about politics, it is partisan, but we're also, you have a group of people here, and there are others in the General Assembly who believe in transparency and good government. And at the end of the day, that's why I'm here. And I believe that we should have as much transparency, as much sunshine, as much light shined on these issues as we possibly can, because at the end of the day, if you, the voters, including all of us, because we vote, don't have confidence in the system, then we're in one hell of a mess. And I think that Williams' bill is an excellent idea. It's just like the first bill, when you talk about paying for special elections and that type of thing if you've been convicted. If you have a campaign fund, then it ought to be taken out of that. You know, there are multiple ways to do it, and I understand what Gilt is talking about with lesser candidates, but once again, leave that to the discretion of the trial judge in that instance, because we give judges in South Carolina wide, broad discretion, as we should. But you know, once again, keep in mind that we are in politics. It is partisan, but let's be transparent and let's establish good government.
Thank you, Judge.
And I do agree with that. There's one caveat is that we, the General Assembly, appoint the judges. So there's just that we have some.
Well, there's going to be politics in appointing judges, PSC commissioners, whatever you do, but once again, that comes back on us. We need to, number one, have great candidates, pay them well, and ensure that we are electing the best candidate.
Amen. Absolutely.
Thank you, Judge. Let's move on to Judge Clary's observation that we shouldn't let politicians appoint people that are their donors to an appointed office for 4 years.
You know, I truly believe that for members of the General Assembly to appoint someone to a public service commission as a judge, as a member of the numerous other boards and commissions that we have influence over or appointment power over, that we should limit the people who contribute to our campaign. You know, if someone has given me a campaign contribution, then that person should not be able to serve for a period of time, and I selected 4 years. Is it 3 years, 2 years, 1 year? That would be up to the General Assembly to decide. You know, I'm not going to be doom and gloom like Congressman Senator Timmons. I'm a glass half full kind of guy rather than a glass half empty. And so, you know, I'm going to leave that to my colleagues in the General Assembly to figure out where that watermark is. But I think that it's really important that we establish some sort of a framework where you can't buy a position. And when you think about that, it's really kind of a no-brainer. And everyone, you know, the counter-argument, well, that's too difficult. It's going to dissuade people from contributing. And, you know, that might not be a bad thing. Granted, we have to have money to run political campaigns, but you know, I had a group that supported me in my first campaign that in the past year or so came to me on an issue, and I said, listen, I can't be with you on that issue. And they were stunned. And they said, well, we supported you. I said, yeah, you did, and so did a lot of other people. You know, if someone thinks because they give me $5, $20, $100, or the maximum $1,000 that they're going to be able to control my vote, then I don't want their money, and they're not going to do that. A very good example of what I'm talking about is the Clemson University Board of Trustees. Clemson is my district, the largest employer in the county, and so the elected trustees have been my friends for years. And when I ran, some of them sent me campaign contributions, and I turned around and sent it back to them because I don't believe that I should receive money from the people that I am electing or have the opportunity to elect to that office. And it goes beyond that, and I hope that we'll get to that point sometime. Maybe not this year, but maybe next year or the next year.
Thank you, Judge Clary. And I'm sending... I'm going to have to get my money back from you because I want to be a public service commissioner. It's like $130,000 a year. They meet once a month. All right, and
They do some amazingly good work.
John, wrap this up, and we're going to move on to
A
disclosure.
good example of the problem, Nikki Haley replaced Darla Moore, the USC Board of Trustees, a woman who had donated almost $100 million to the University of South Carolina with a small-time campaign contributor from Lexington County who gave Nikki Haley $4,500 in campaign contributions. Those are the consequences of the system we have right now.
Amen.
Thank you, John. So, Judge, the next one is in line with this, and it's about transfer and disclosure. that an immediate family member lobbying the office that they serve in. Explain that to us.
Well, H 4443 is an expansion of what we did in 2015, 16, when we passed an ethics bill. And as Lynn Teague will say, we improved light years with the 2016 bill. But this was a key part that was left out. We disclose, income, but sources of income, such as in the Quinn issue, if you are getting money from a lobbyist principal, or your family's getting money from a lobbyist principal, these are issues that are, it shouldn't be happening. When I look back at people who have been charged with crimes that previously served in the General Assembly, specifically Jim Harrison and Tracy Edge, and to think that they received over $900,000 allegedly through the Quinns is repulsive to me. And it goes against everything that I am talking about when I talk about being transparent and open. And people may say, well, it's easy for you to talk about that because you're not out there working anymore. Well, I had a very good mediation and arbitration practice before I came here, and I've done 3 mediations in 4 years. This is a full-time job. I don't care how anybody says that it's any different. And when I look at my colleagues here that have to make a living, I'm in awe of them. But all I want to do with this bill is to close the loop on being able to evade a process that would have picked up violations such as this. And how many other people are receiving consulting gigs from other lobbyist principals? How many people are promoting legislation and working for a group? That's what's wrong. That's the reason people don't have confidence and faith in our system. And that's all I'm trying to do. Once again, raising the bar on transparency and good government.
Judge, this is an excellent segue to Gilda Cobb-Hunter's bill that would restrain corporations from giving financial donations to legislators that regulate the corporations that gave them the donation. Representative Cobb-Hunter, do you have any examples of that happening?
Wow, what a softball. Of course, there are examples that all of us are aware of. We've had references earlier to SCANA, to the Dominion deal. The 2007 Baseload Review Act was passed with very little debate at that time, and there were a number of members, myself included, who received donations from SCANA. One of the things I want to make sure is a part of the conversation about ethics, about disclosure, about contributions, is that I take issue with the automatic assumption that because one makes contributions, that means you will vote that way. I want to just remind you of the point that Judge Clary just made about his friends who were on Clemson. He didn't take any donations from them, but he did give the example of someone who made a contribution who later discovered that he was not necessarily supportive. So I think a part of what we have to have in this conversation about ethics has to be about the men and women who we are sending to represent us. Because if you are a person with no integrity, then it doesn't matter what, in my opinion, how many ethics laws you pass or don't pass. If somebody's a crook, they're going to figure out a way to be a crook, I believe. And so I do think that really like the idea of limiting contributions to people and then rewarding family members and others with positions. The bill that I filed particularly focuses on the utilities. And there is a reason for that, of course, because of all that we are talking about now and all that we are forced or faced with. But I do, as I said, I do want to make a point that we ought not to assume that because somebody accepts a campaign contribution, that they are automatically in the pockets of whoever gave them that contribution. There are, I won't paint with a wide brush, there are members that does apply, who that does apply to. But I just think as a general rule, we make a mistake when we automatically assume that if we give somebody a contribution, that they are going to be beholden to the person who gave them a contribution.
Thank you, Representative Lindsay.
Yes, I absolutely agree with Representative Cobb-Hunter. We can't, it's absurd to believe that a $500 or $1,000 donation is buying the vote of your legislator. These things become so oversimplified. I did have a very disturbing experience early on working on the utility issues more than 2 years ago when it was clear that the regulatory system was failing if you looked closely, but a lot of people didn't want to look closely at that point. I was speaking to some legislators about it, and what I came to understand better than I had before was it's not just carrots, it's about sticks. It may be more about sticks than it is about carrots. I had one legislator who clearly understood when we reviewed for them the problems, the issues, but absolutely declined to have anything to do with trying to amend the Base Load Review Act on grounds that there was absolute confidence that SCANA would fund their opponent. They weren't so much interested in whether they would get the money. They were interested in whether someone else would end up with PACs, with wealthy executives, and with the company itself pouring money into somebody to run against them.
Thank you, Senator Thomas.
I got to tell you a funny story. So we did the budget last year, and I was brand new, and I had 7 different provisos that I had worked on, and they were in order of increasing difficulty. And I got my first one through, and I was shocked. And I got my second one, and my third one, and my fourth one. I got to my 5th one. And it is almost identical to Judges H4443. And again, they were in order of increasing difficulty. And so I'm new and I'm just kind of excited and I feel good about it. And what I did with this proviso is I directed the State Ethics Commission how to use the money. And so I identified some money. I said, do this. And it did exactly that. It was only for 1 year. But ultimately, I don't want to indict the legislature as a whole, but I'm going to say 20, 30, 40, minimum 20, maximum 50%. You would find out something if H4443 was passed that would make your stomach hurt. And so I did not get that proviso through. They fought me on it being germane to the budget as modifying actual law, and then they fought me on the merits, and I thought of everything. I knew exactly what they were going to say on why they didn't want it, except for one thing. And they said that this was the current law. And we got into this little, no, it's not. And they said, yes, it is. I said, no, it's not. And they said, yes, it is. And I felt like I was in middle school. And they killed it. So I actually didn't even get a vote because I was so shocked at what just happened. I'm going to do it again this year. So that's number one. And number 2, pay is critical to solving this problem. Making so little, my businesses run themselves. I've worked very hard over the last decade, and I have made enough money to where I can do this. This is public service. I actually donate my salary. I've lost more money serving in the General Assembly, but I've enjoyed it, and I do not regret one day of it. But I'm going to tell you this, if we do not pay legislators appropriately, it is impossible to serve honorably you can't expect them to do that, because ultimately, I mean, even in my businesses, I have 3 businesses right now, I have had to actively avoid conflicts. I've had people try to hire me as an attorney, and they would give me a ton of money, and I'm just like, wow, that'd be great. And I'm like, but they're hiring me because I'm a senator. And you just can't do that. And I'm a young version of Judge Clary, but I value.
Thank you, William.
I value my integrity and I value my reputation, and I will not have that tarnished at any cost. It's just not worth it. And so I will just say this. The easiest way to fix this issue about legislators doing things they shouldn't and creating conflicts within their decision-making where they're not making decisions based off of what is right and what is best for their constituents. They're making conflicted decisions, which is really what we're talking about here. The best way to do that they're not going to argue with, is paying them more money.
Thanks, Senator. And that would give John Krangle an opportunity to talk about something we can never do, but he dreams about a lot, which is professional politicians. Very briefly, John, talk about that unicameral legislation with professional politicians.
Okay, well, before I do, let me mention I had a dream the other night that Donald Trump had become the 4th person of the Blessed Trinity. And he contacted me and said, I'll give you one wish to clean up the corrupt government in South Carolina. What would it be? And I would say ban corporate contributions. I've been there for 31 years, and I believe that the source of a great deal of the corruption and abuse at the General Assembly is contributions from corporations, okay? I believe corporations donate money to candidates for one reason and one reason only, to buy access and buy votes, okay? At the federal level, the Tillman Act has banned corporate contributions since 1906, okay? And you, for example, as a candidate for Congress, would not be able to accept a corporate donation. So that's something
Who
has...
was that Tillman guy?
The same one that has a statue over there. Everybody has some good about it, and that was the only thing I know that Tillman ever did that was any good. But if we want to deal with corruption, over and over again, Operation Lost Trust, in the current situation, you look at the money that was involved in corrupt activity. Where did the bulk of the money come from? It came from corporate campaign contributions, all right? If we're not serious about cleaning up the mess in South Carolina, we will continue to ignore the evil, the unmitigated evil of campaign contributions from corporations.
Mr. Krangle, I hate that I'm ever going to disagree with you. All that they're going to do is increase the salaries of the top 5 executives, and those 5 executives are going to give 5 times as much. I've seen it done, and so, I mean, I'm all for that. I'll vote for it. I'm in. But if I run a business and my job is to get money from the legislature, that's how it's going to happen. There's nothing illegal about it. There's nothing we can do. It'd be structuring is what I would argue. But, I mean, I've seen it done in Greenville. I mean, we have a massive problem we're dealing with a governmental entity that is not allowed to give campaign contributions, but they pay all their executives $1 million+ a year, and all of a sudden
Thank you,
they
Senator.
write checks.
That's the argument that we've been making for public financing for a long time. I'm glad to have you on board. Take it home. We're moving on.
And I'll close with this, because we were talking about whether legislators do good things or evil things with the money and whether they will or bypass the system. This bill, because I've co-sponsored it in the Senate, I'm sponsoring it because people deserve to have trust in those that they send to Columbia. And right now, no one trusts the General Assembly to make the right decision about SCANA and Dominion. They don't trust us.
Right on.
And they don't trust us because money's flying around like dollar bills at a strip club. Dominion is spending money on full-page ads. You can lie, you can laugh if you want to, but we're getting full-page ads, we're getting radio ads, we're getting TV ads. They're making donations to every campaign. The reason that we're doing it is not whether or not a good person or a bad person is doing something. The people deserve to have faith in us,
Yes.
that we won't be bought out and we will look after the one group that hadn't been looked after, and that's the ratepayers of South Carolina.
Thank you, Senator. Well, I want to take a little moderator's privilege here to give you some history. And what the problem isn't necessarily the money that's coming now. The problem is the culture that was created a long time ago. And I had the opportunity in 1978 in my backyard in Peak, South Carolina. I look up and they were building a nuclear reactor 3.5 miles from my bed. And I said, damn, I'm going to get involved in the public hearings. What public hearings? The last reactor in America, the 78th reactor, would have been the only one built without public hearings. And it was because, well, it's the power company. You trust them? And I was the intervener. I spent 5 years in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission court and watched this thing happen. And at the end of it, the manager of the nuclear plant thanked me so much because we've got a better plant because it was an adversary proceeding.
Amen.
And I got off an airplane shortly thereafter in LaGuardia. And in front of me, a poster bigger than life of this guy in a dirty T-shirt with a hard hat on with a flower in his mouth and his belly poking out. And it said, South Carolina has no labor pains. The lowest number of work hours lost due to work stoppages, strikes, and regulations in the nation. Come on down, we work cheap and we're stupid. And so our regulatory bodies have been set up, once we started courting industry from the north, to be incredibly business friendly. These legislators have inherited that culture. It's a mess. So, moving right on, that was my history lesson, probably, to Majeska Simpkins School. Go there, learn it. Representative Cobb-Hunter,
I won't tell my story from
we want to talk about your idea about taking public financing for the Attorney General. We were just talking about public financing with Senator Timmons. He seems to be a fan of it now. Now, why would our Attorney General be deserving of public financing?
Well, when we think about the fact that the Attorney General is our top cop, he or she is the top law enforcement officer in the state. And I just think it makes sense that we not allow someone who may potentially be called upon to investigate others to accept contributions. What the bill, there are two bills I've filed, and what the bill does is simply give that candidate a choice to opt into a public financing operation. And by that, what we're saying is if I'm running for Attorney General and I don't want to have all the dirty money we've talked about up here from the corporations and people making it rain outside of strip clubs and all of that.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
If I'm running for Attorney General, then it would be an option for me that I could decide to accept public financing. The other part of the bill puts the question on the ballot because, you know, here in South Carolina, you can't do anything without changing the Constitution, or so it appears. And so what the second bill does is simply put the question on the ballot as to whether or not an AG, Attorney General candidate, can decide or has the flexibility to publicly finance an election for Attorney General. Bottom line in all of this that I've said is that I think somebody whose chief responsibility is investigating criminal acts, civil acts, that we ought not put that person in the position of having accepted contributions from somebody that he or she may well wind up having to investigate.
Amen.
Thank you. John Krenkel, you were in a room I was in one time when somebody that is now the governor of South Carolina commented on public financing. Do you recall what Mr. McMaster said about public financing?
I was a member of the Campaign Finance Reform Commission appointed by Governor Jim Hodges back in 2001, 2002. Henry McMaster, Dick Harpootlian, Laurel Suggs from the League of Women Voters, and Dean John Montgomery from the law school were also commissioners. I suggested, and by a 3-2 vote, the commission favored the idea of public financing for the Attorney General. The Attorney General should be above the influence exercised by big corporations and political action committees and silk stocking law firms who give the bulk of the contributions for that race. We want attorneys general who are independent of campaign contributions and special interests. So I think it's a good idea. Henry McMaster at the time opposed public financing for other positions, but he told me if there's any one office where public financing makes sense, it is the Attorney General's race. And he ought to know, okay? Because he was Attorney General later on.
I want to point out that it's easier to get the legislature to give up the money for a constitutional officer than it is to give up their own money. maybe there's a chance for this bill. If we wanted to move on, we want to talk about ethics funding. We've put gerrymandering down at the end. We want to finish all of this in 23 minutes, so we've got 30 minutes to hear from you. Senator Timmons, 7666 would require campaign contributions to be deposited.
The 766 first.
Sounded evil there, absolutely.
Y'all are spending too much time together. Anyway, you're talking about getting money
Yep.
from the interest.
I'll explain it. So
That's not much
it
money.
actually does two things, and the first is really not as important as the second. I'll back up. So I'm an attorney. I have an IOLTA account, interest on lawyer's trust account. That money, it's funny, when I opened the account, I was really upset because I thought it was ridiculous, and then I called the Bar Association, and this trust account system generated $1.8 million last year for the Indigent Defense Fund. So I was like, okay, I'm all right with that. Took me like 5 minutes. I was really okay with that. So I got the idea about how are we making our money work for us, and ultimately, right now we have around $12 million in campaign accounts across the state, and that money's not bearing any interest, or very little of it is. So the idea was to mimic the IOLTA system, and I call it the IOCA system, interest on campaign accounts. So what that does is it'll generate around $100,000 a year, give it to the State Ethics Commission, and that's really not the important part. The important part is setting up a system that allows, I call it the easy button. Right now, the state Senate has to submit quarterly our campaign bank account records to the Senate Ethics Committee. It's a huge pain. It takes 15, 20 minutes. You gotta get PDFs, you gotta send it. And the House does not do that at all. So the only thing that anybody sees that's looking in the public, they see the ethics filing. I could put on there that I raised whatever amount of money from whoever I want, and unless somebody's really careful and looks at it, they'll have no idea. And I could have way more in my campaign account and never tell anybody. Nobody'd ever know. So we need to make the bank records available to those that are responsible for looking into it. That's a no-brainer. So what this bill does is, outside of the interest component, it will give bank record access automatically to the Senate Ethics Committee, the House Ethics Committee, and the State Ethics Commission, which is, in my opinion, is a no-brainer, and I'm not Mr. Doom and Gloom for once. Not only do I have 18 co-sponsors, and it's no longer 766 if you're looking at it, it is now 931. I had to modify it a little bit, but not only is it bipartisan support, I've got 18 co-sponsors, no one has said no, but I already have enough votes to get it out of judiciary as co-sponsors, and most importantly, Senator Luke Rankin is a co-sponsor. So I'm excited about this. This is one thing that I think we can do. Everybody in the General Assembly agrees we got to do something. Unfortunately, nobody agrees on what. So this is something that I have gotten a lot of positive response from, and I'm really excited about it, and I do think we're going to do it this year.
Judge Clary, is that a good idea?
That's an excellent idea, and Senator Timmons and I met back in December talking about the respective bills that we have, and both of us come from, come from a background where we've always had to keep up with trust money. It has to balance. Campaign accounts are the same way. One thing in the House is that we are audited periodically by our ethics committee. Your campaign account has to balance. I've been audited since I've been here. And when I file my report every quarter, the real key is to be able, when I get ready to hit that button, after I put everything in for that amount that is listed in my account, to match what my checkbook says. So that is truly a great way of doing it. It's also a great way that Senator Timmons is talking about, that it's only $100,000, but $100,000 for the Ethics Commission is a lot of money, and that helps a tremendous amount. You know, I want to go back to one thing, if I can, Brett, that Lynn hit on in the last discussion, talking about folks in the General Assembly are afraid that if they take a certain position, that a third party will come after them. That's the reason Representative Mandy Powers Norrell and I have a bill dealing with dark money. Amen. We need to be able to know who is contributing to these third-party groups, what is fueling them, what is funding them, and the reason that they're going after them.
Thank you, Judge.
I think many of us have been victims of third-party groups that you don't know who they are or where they're coming from.
Talk to Senator Leatherman about that. I think you've got a lot of support for that one, Senator. I want to hear, Gilda Cobb-Hunter has a bill in that's got more moving parts, raises more money, and it's defined as a low-cost, high-tech solution to multiple problems. Representative Cobb-Hunter, 4,500.
Thanks, Brett. And just ditto everything that has already been said, but one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we can pass all kinds of disclosure bills, but if we don't have at the other end of that someone who's actually staffing it, who's doing the work, who's making sure that what you have shared is accurate, is timely, and all of that. What this bill does is two things. One, and the Senate bill is 1%, is the interest bearing. What this bill does is take 5% of all campaign contributions and gives that money to the State Ethics Committee. There have been a lot of conversations both inside and outside the legislature about who is the best fit to monitor legislators. There are a lot of people inside and outside of the General Assembly who believe that the job ought to be that of the State Ethics Committee, that we shouldn't trust House ethics or Senate ethics to police members. What this bill does is acknowledge that and say, okay, if we want the Ethics Committee, State Ethics Committee, to have these responsibilities, we got to generate revenue to pay them. Our current State Ethics Committee is woefully underfunded, short-staffed, and all of this. And so a portion of the 5% on all contributions would go toward the State Ethics Committee. The other piece of this is that this is where we find the funding for the public financing of Attorney General's campaigns. I believe very strongly in public financing. It's an idea who even in South Carolina is coming around and being discussed. I think the IOTA interest bearing is one way to open the door to get some financing and some kind of system. But we must be careful. And when we talk about making changes, we must recognize that if you don't put the revenue there, that all you've done is change something on paper that really doesn't matter if you are not committed to providing the Ethics Committee, the State Ethics Committee, with enough funding so that they can do the work that they are being charged with.
Quick thing.
So,
So I told you the new number for my bill that was S766, and now it's S931.
it's changed in the last 10 minutes?
No, I just told that a minute ago. And the reason that it is no longer S766 is because a component of S766 was that we would charge a 1% fee on all campaign contributions, and that money would go to the State Ethics Commission. That would be around $400,000. And let me tell you how many people said, not no, but hell no.
Wow.
Almost
Because
all.
they don't want the State Ethics
So,
Committee to monitor.
You know, I don't know, nobody said that,
Right.
but they said,
Surprise.
they said that that was their money and that it wasn't right to take it from. And I said, well, I'm sure your campaign contributors will feel better knowing that we're doing something about the corruption problem in Colombia. And it was still a non-starter. And so I'm just letting y'all know what we're up against. I mean, to me, 1% of the money that comes into my campaign account is just silly to actually say that we're doing something. And ultimately, there was a silver lining, and that was that one of the people that was most against it is also on the Finance Committee and has promised to try to get $250,000 in the budget for the Finance Committee on a recurring basis. So if that works out, great. I'm gonna do a proviso just in case he doesn't. But we'll see.
But y'all, listen to the point that the senator just made, and I don't want you to lose that. And that is this notion of, that's my money.
Yeah, right on.
Think about it, you know, in the words of Joe Madison, listen with the third ear and read with the third eye. It's my money. So I believe that in and of itself is a part of the problem
Yes.
that we have. It goes back to the point that was made earlier, the whole notion of culture and the culture of corruption. And unfortunately, we kind of got that here in the South Carolina General Assembly on some levels.
Well, thank you, Representative Cobb-Hunter. We're gonna move on now to the big question that is on everybody's minds is, what do we do that South Carolina now has been identified as having the worst elections in the nation, the 50th competition in South Carolina, according to the National Institute on Money and State Politics, is the worst in the nation using 3 metrics to measure it. The amount of money the winners spend being greater than the amount of money that the losers spend, and only 2% of the losers had as much money, and that was the lowest in the nation. The other was the opportunity that being an incumbent gives you, and it was the best in South Carolina. And the other was the opportunity of running without opposition, which identifies South Carolina. We have now only 8.6% of the people electing the majority of the majority party in a primary, 8.6% of the people. And so there's a bill that Representative Clary has, that's one that Killed the Cobb-Hunter was a co-sponsor on in the previous session. And I know that the Lloyd Funderburk and the League and the judge, and they're all very concerned about lack of democratic representation. Judge Clary, what are we going to do about it?
Well, but before I get into the gerrymandering bill or independent redistricting, let me say one thing when we talk about all these ethics bills, and it's something that I normally say when I tweet about it, and Gilda Cobb's one of my friends on Twitter, and Lynn and a few others. On all of these bills, watch who or whom opposes it. Watch who or whom opposes it. I think that says it all. 4456 is the independent redistricting bill, and the genesis of it with me, and I know that it's been around in some form or fashion, is the fact that members of the General Assembly should not be drawing the district lines for their own districts, for the senatorial districts, for the congressional districts. You know, once again, I come from, just like Senator Timmons, I come from a system of fairness. I want someone to have a level playing field out there. And, you know, I've never been through a redistricting on the side of the rope that I'm on now as a judicial candidate, and in other phases of my career, I've seen it from afar. But in knowing what goes on, you know, members of the General Assembly should not be adjusting the lines. In our bill, and it's me, Representative Laurie Funderburk, Representative Beth Bernstein, Representative Jason Elliott, who's a colleague on the Greenville delegation with Senator Timmons, Representative Will Wheeler, Representative William Cogswell, Representative Neil Collins, Representative Thigpen and Smith from this area. You know, it's truly a bipartisan group, and we're of course looking for as many co-sponsors as we can get. But the key to it is that the way this commission would be composed is that the governor would appoint 2 members, one of which can be from his or her party. Then the House Majority Caucus and Minority Caucus, the Republican Caucus and the Democratic Caucus, would elect representatives as well as the Senate. And so these would be 6 people who are not elected officials. And you know, everybody says, well, you can't remove politics from it. No, you can't. You know, it's just like a judge. When I was elected as a judge and I swore that I was going to uphold the Constitution of this state, the United States, and the laws therein, I took with me biases and prejudice to that job that I had to set aside. I'm deciding cases based upon the law and the Constitution and making rulings, and I have to park my opinion at the door. And these 6 people would get together and elect a 7th person, and if they're unable to do so within a relatively short period of time, about 10 days I think it says, then the governor would be able to appoint another person. They would then hold hearings around the state to hear from the people of South Carolina, and there is criteria in the bill that lays out the roadmap for the things that they are to consider. And at the end of that process, then they're going to send their redistricting map to the General Assembly. Once again, this is not a Republican thing or a Democratic thing, because there are people in that big room that Gilda and I serve in over there from both sides of the aisle that are opposed to it. Democrats and Republicans. But at the end of the day, what I want to be able to do is say, listen, the General Assembly is out of the business of drawing our district lines. We're going to turn that over to an independent redistricting commission.
Thank you, Judge. Representative Cobb-Hunter, do you want to comment on anything that you were a sponsor on that bill? You've been thinking about it as we move forward. I don't think that Judge Clary believes this bill is going to pass this session. The glass is half full, though. And moving forward,
we have time.
We do.
Plenty. Plenty of time.
Amen.
I think we are compelled to work on it. I have been a part of conversation. I've been a part of redistricting efforts, and it is not pretty. And I think the state has suffered because of the gerrymandering that the South Carolina legislature has done over the last several processes. I've been working, and Judge, I thought I had signed on to yours. I know Lori Funderburk and I introduced one that did.
I'll be glad to have
Yeah,
you.
I'll sign on tomorrow. I thought I was on there. We have been working on this issue. Here's my problem. I just don't believe legislators ought to have anything at all to do with the redistricting, including putting people on panels. And so, working with the Progressive Network, we've been kind of looking at systems that have been effective, air quotes, across the country. And we are working on something that would involve a redistricting commission that the General Assembly would have a hands-off approach on. It is more a citizens committee as opposed to a legislative appointed committee. And I don't know, well, thank you, baby. I don't know. Appreciate that. Maybe I'm just too seasoned, shall we say, but I just believe that any effort that allows legislators to be a part of it will result in pretty much what we have now. I just believe that. But you know, it really is up to the public. And even if we don't pass redistricting, I think we need to do a better job as voters in deciding who we want to represent us in Columbia, as well as in Washington. And I really believe very strongly that voters have shirked their responsibility as voters. We are low information in some respects. We listen, we want very quick solutions to very complex problems. If it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, if you can't explain it in 30 seconds, then eyes glaze over. And so I'm more, with all of the efforts, I really think we ought to talk more about voter education and about what we need to be looking for. We need to move away from the party labels because, quite frankly, as my grandmama used to say, you put us all in a box, a bag, and shake us up, and we're all going to fall out at the same time. Meaning, young people like, oh, wonder what that means. Meaning it ain't a lot of difference when you get right down to it. And so I think redistricting and gerrymandering are ideas and are things that we've got to come to terms with for the long-term viability of this state and this country. Because when you govern and you have one perspective or even two perspectives, you're missing out on a whole lot of things. We, in my view, and I've gone way beyond the redistricting question, but just to put a pin and close this loop, I believe very strongly that we ought to be more committed to finding men and women who serve and who have service as their mantra. We are not doing that now. We are electing men and women who got the talking points down. They say what we want to hear. They don't challenge you on any level, and I don't think it's good government. And I believe as a result of our shortcomings as uneducated voters paying attention to issues and not going in just voting on a straight party label, we've wound up with some real interesting people who are serving. Judge can tell you, and Representative Brawley and Representative Alexander can tell you, maybe not on the Senate side, but we've got some real interesting people who serve in the South Carolina House. And I don't mean interesting in a nice way. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Cobb. I'm going to wrap this up. Applause, applause. And what I want to do while I'm wrapping it up is let people know we're wrapping it up so you can come ask questions to the representatives and the advocates here. But to talk about the work that we've been doing for years looking at the restoration of democracy in South Carolina. And I remember Gilda Cobb-Hunter's CD bills in 2010 were the only ones that didn't have a majority black district. All the Democrats had 2, all the Republicans had 1, and Gilda had none. But she had 2 that were competitive.
And
the
got
third
no
was
support from Democrats or Black Caucus members, 1 or 2 Republicans. But, you know, people are selfish. It's like, hey, they went in, cut their little deal,
Well, that's why they
cut
shouldn't-
their district, and the hell with the rest of the state.
Amen.
That's why we shouldn't let them draw the lines. But what Cobb-Hunter said at the time was we've got to elect people that represent people that don't look like them. Instead of letting everybody elect everybody in 8.6% of the turnout that look just like them. So that's a big lift, folks, but we've got a lot of people on our side. And we've done, on the table outside, is a list of I think it's 125 people that ran with no opposition, got 99%. That's not what democracy looks like. Here's your snapshot that shows you how few people turned out. This is a study we paid $3,000. The university called 1,000 people and asked them if they knew how the lines were drawn. Most people didn't. The Republicans thought they were fair. The Democrats thought they weren't. But everybody, 65% of everybody, said the politicians shouldn't draw the lines. And so there's no one lining up here to have any questions. Is this true? We got a microphone here. If you...
Yeah.
Well, we won't get the question on the tape.
Record.
Come on, Jane. Come on down. Larry, let Jane.
It sounds to me that the people in this room who care about gerrymandering should not support the bill that we've been presented. We should oppose it.
We probably won't get a chance to vote on it. Speak to while.
Well, there are too many ways. There are computer programs, there are scientists, there are mathematicians. There are too many people who can put in the data and give us a good result. That everybody, I think that Gilda's exactly right. People don't want to vote because they don't feel like it's going to matter. And this is one of the reasons, but to me, instead of seeing this proposal as, wow, this is a step in the right direction, we need to oppose it because it's not enough.
Well, we've got till 2021. We have to pass a bill in early 2020. We don't get the census numbers back until April 2021. So we've got time to organize a mass movement. Judge? Thank you, ma'am.
Well, my response to you would be this. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and I look at it realistically, and realistically, this is the first step. Are we going to get everything that is needed in the first, at the first bite of the apple? No. I've had discussions with the League of Women Voters and others. Once again, this is not a perfect bill, and if you expect to get a perfect bill, then you're going to wind up in 2022 with the General Assembly drawing the lines in this state.
I'd like to add that there is a Senate bill that has no General Assembly involvement at all, and it's doing exactly what you would expect, which is sitting there immobile, not moving an inch, with no interest whatsoever generated in support of it. So,
first I would say don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm fully in support of the judge's bill, and I think it would be a good step in the right direction. That said, I did also want to bring up politics. Taking politics out of this process is very important, but there's not a proposal that has been made that will do that. Even doing citizen commission is still going to be political because so many people in the General Assembly have been in there long enough to remember when one of their buddies, who made a couple people mad, was redistricted out of his district. That happened a lot. So there is a understandable hesitancy or refusal to do this because it has been used as a weapon against people. So that's number one. Number two, every time I say the word algorithm, the people that have been there for 30 years look at me like I just spoke Greek. But this is the thing. An algorithm, we could agree to the variables that go into the formula that dictate the outcome. And those variables could be hotly contested. And we could talk about how we don't want to have half precincts. We don't want to have streets where neighbors are voting in different elections. We don't want to have districts that look hilarious. They don't go down an interstate to grab some more people. But honestly, there's some federal law that requires us to do some of those things, and population shifts and demographics are going to continue to create complexity. So again, I just think if the legislature could agree on the formula, that it wouldn't require people. But
Let me respond before we take the next question. I've been working with the best and brightest in the nation on redistricting that are doing the cases that have been to the Supreme Court. Just had a meeting in Charlotte last week. The cutting edge idea, and it's a complicated one, and I said, damn, there's too many moving parts. But what it does is it restores citizens' involvement in politics. It's a citizens commission that's chosen like a jury pool, and everybody in South Carolina can apply. Your only criteria is to be a voter. A very complicated process, but it ends up going through a weeding out process that we have to define that ends up with a Republican and a Democrat from each congressional district and an alternate Republican and Democrat from each congressional district that does this stuff. And they can use the algorithms, but we've got citizens we drew at random, and we essay them and we interview them, we know who they are, and the we've got to be worked out. It may be retired judges or something, but there's these plans out there. And the woman that wrote the independent commission bill in Pennsylvania warned me. She said, we did one like yours, and you won't believe the holes they found to crawl through. So we've got some time, but we're together leaving here with a takeaway. We've got to do it to save democracy. Larry? Short.
I was not paid mileage from House District 114 tonight. Bobby Harrell didn't take his mileage pay for hundreds and hundreds of trips to this state capitol. Mileage is an important part of compensation for serving in the Senate and the House, and doesn't seem to have any enforcement mechanism in the code for people taking campaign money and fly in their airplane here, or whoever owned it. So I'm deeply affected by this lack of law enforcement and judges overreaching pro forma legislation. I was kicked off the Democratic Party ballot 6 years ago, and only the Green Party allowed me back on the ballot to challenge Speaker Harrell. So if it was mentioned before I got here, fine, but if it was not, please address the issue of that outrageous fascist activity of stripping over 170 of us off the ballots in 2012.
Thank you, Larry. Did anyone touch that one?
We should not have done it.
Ma'am?
I was just saying to Larry that we should not have done it. We meaning all part, and I'm not a Republican, but I just think that was the wrong thing to do. I don't well, I do understand, but I just firmly believe that the seats belong to the people, not to individuals. And quite frankly, at the risk of my Democratic friends saying, oh my God, what happened to her? We need to have a system that is different than these two-party systems that we have here.
Thank you, Josh. Josh?
Have any of you actually been in on a redistricting committee process? And if so, what does that process actually look like?
I don't know that they can talk about it in mixed company.
I guess I'm the only one up here who has. Let me just say, just procedurally, that is something that is done by the Judiciary Committee, traditionally in the House, even though the lines and all of it's handled through the Judiciary Committee. The tradition has been to get with individual members and allow him or her to draw their districts. And what has resulted from that have been, in my view, districts that are bleached and districts that are very bland and similar. That's the black districts as well as those that are not. The last time we had redistricting, as Brett pointed out, I drew a map for when we got the 7th congressional seat. I drew a map for the congressional districts that had 5 Republican districts, 2 influenced Democratic districts. And as I pointed out, I could not get support from the Democratic caucus. I could not get support from the Black caucus. The Democratic congressman made it clear to the Black Democrats as well as the white Democrats that he did not support my plan. And as a result, it didn't go anywhere. The reason that's important is because later there were conversations in the Democratic caucus and the Black caucus about going to the Justice Department. To me, that was pretty stupid, because how in the hell are you going to a Justice Department to make a case for something that you didn't take the floor to talk against? You voted for. You went in the room and cut your little deal and made your district blacker in a lot of cases. So what are we going to the Justice Department with? So the process, in my view, is just not one that is in the best interest of the state. And that's true here in South Carolina and most of the states where, in my opinion, redistricting is done by the legislature. You just have to understand, people are just selfish. They kind of like these jobs, even though they don't pay anything. There are a lot of people who just get off on being, you know, the genuflecting and all of that, and so they want to keep them. And so they'll do anything, just about some of them, to maintain them. But I don't think it's good public policy. I don't think it's been good for South Carolina.
Thank you. Senator Josh, he's got another response there, Josh.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, I think I probably have one of the most Republican districts in the state of South Carolina. I mean, Joe Biden himself, my favorite Democrat ever, could move into my district and I'd still beat him. I mean, it really is crazy. And to tell you that everything that you're talking about is true, I have heard unanimously, the district changed substantially last redistricting, and I have heard unanimously that that was done for purposes that are unacceptable. I'm not going to talk about the people involved, but it's just the game. That's how they do it. So, I mean, this is a real problem. It shouldn't be this way. I will never have my district will never have a Democrat even run, even file. I mean, it would be 80-20, maybe.
Well,
at best.
you will find out what they've been putting in the water all these years. The Greenville district, the Greenville legislative delegation, I believe, is 21 members, and 19 of them are Republicans.
And I'll tell you right now, we could gain another Republican seat, and if, this is a caution I would tell you, any version of redistricting will draw, if we just did it right now, and it was in this room agreed on whatever formula, we're gonna lose one more Democrat in Greenville. That they are there only because of this system that we all consider broken. So, I mean, there are consequences to actions in all regards, and whether they are good or bad is what we have to consider.
I don't know whether John's question is about redistricting, but let me say, because it may not be, that what we're looking at is the opportunity to organize between now and 2020 to demand the legislators put it on the ballot and let us vote on it if they can't make a decision. And if all of us do that, we may be able to go around them. We're going to try and legislate. If we can't do that, we'll try and litigate. If we can't do that, we're going to organize. You're on, John.
I just had a quick comment. Well, thanks to you guys. What I heard you say earlier was 4 times a year you had to report this, and it takes like 15 to 20 minutes as far as disclosure goes. As a society, we want things to be done fast. We want 140 characters. We want short videos. We want everything to be concise. What about bringing in some new technology for the disclosure process to make it simpler? So once a day, you do a daily entry as to mileage, whatever category your situation applies to that day, but just make it easier. Because personally, if it's something that's going to take me 15 to 20 minutes, I'll find a reason not to do it every single quarter, and before you know it, I'm backed up or whatever. So what about introducing some new technology into the process just to make it a little easier and a little faster?
I'll take that real quick. So
Okay.
I actually had a meeting with the South Carolina Bankers Association last week about this exact thing. And again, technology has the ability to fix a lot of our problems in government. We just don't have people in government that know how to use technology. So ultimately, they said it can be done, but it will be expensive, and the question is how you pay for it. So, I mean, that's a great point, and we can do it. It just requires us to prioritize that over things like school buses and,
So long term, do you think we bite the cost and pay for it in 2018, or keep paying for it until 2050?
I'm a business owner. I do capital improvements for things, and I pay it off long term, and it makes sense,
Gotcha.
I mean, if we spend a couple $100 million on something up front and it saves us billions and billions of dollars,
Then it makes sense.
it's worth it. But
Right.
that's really hard to explain to Leatherman in the finance committee.
For example.
For example,
So-
if I was on the finance committee.
If you're there. All right, and the other thing, I just had this one quick question. It's actually simple, but it's complex. Do you think the disclosure is the problem, or is the law more of the problem?
Yes.
Judge, thank you.
The whole problem is the system that has been created
Right,
allows there to be a loophole.
right,
And, I'm a black and white kind of guy.
gotcha.
I don't like a lot of gray. And so the more that we can eliminate the gray, the better off we're going to be. And to go back to what you were questioning and Senator Timmons responded to, these reports that we do, we're talking about campaign reports. We file a statement of economic interest it's due in April. And that's where we reveal sources of income, things that we've received. We got a jersey from USC last year, a football jersey
Right.
with our names on it and our district number, and we'll be reporting, I think it's about $60. Then, you know, there are things like that that we report. But, you know, there are people in the General Assembly that don't know how to cut on a computer, that have a flip phone.
Gotcha.
You know, it's part of the process. And, you know, we're trying to take steps
I
here.
understand.
And, you know, once again, I know that patience it's a very difficult thing,
Oh, I
particularly
understand.
in something this important, but I think that we have to be patient and try to get it as right as we can. Once again, listen, what we do is, you know, when you watch a sausage made up close, it's not pretty.
Oh, I get it. My mother, for example, she anti-computer, anti-smartphone, everything. But we got her an iPad about 2 years ago, and now she's a whiz with the iPad. So there was a learning curve.
Yeah.
But as time went on, she only goes to 4 sites, but she can use it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, full disclosure, I am not a citizen of this lovely country, but I do live here in this state, so.
Could you get a little bit closer to the mic?
I am not a citizen of this country, but I do live here in this state, so everything that you all decide, and I say you all now because I've been here almost 10 years, is going to affect me as well as it does your voting citizens. So I had a question about S533. And maybe I've been watching too much Leverage, but I see immense possibilities for grift here. And my question about making the judge have discretion over whether to enforce a restitution, good old boy gets elected to the House, good old girl, don't want to be gender specific here, basically for the grift. And they are in the pocket of corporations, they're getting all kinds of money, they go in front of, they get caught, they get convicted, go in front of the judge, who was also a good old buddy, and it's, well, you know, you are a good citizen, you just got kind of caught in the spider web because you're new, you don't know what you're doing, we're going to let go for a really minimal fine or no sentence at all, you know, go and be in peace. Is there a possibility, rather than making a you know, sliding scale or discretion of the judge, to like impose, no, if you get caught doing this, you are going to pay that restitution back into the system?
Well, I want to let the judge talk about this. I will share with you the way the bill is written now is exactly what you just stated. The bill now requires restitution. It does not leave it at the discretion of the judge. So it would require it of everyone.
Okay.
Well, but I think your question may be more to the point of, if I go and serve in the legislature and essentially illegally obtain, let's just say, $4.9 million, and then they give me a $1,000 fine and no jail time, you're talking about that restitution, not.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, how many people would pay a $1,000 fine for $4.9 million?
Yeah. I mean, I'm an honest person, I'm a Canadian, for goodness sakes, and I would.
There is
I
a
also-
restitution provision in the Ethics Act that authorizes the prosecuting attorney, the Attorney General, to sue civilly to recover the fruits of criminal activity by public officials. So if you took a bribe for $100,000, the AG could sue to recover that.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, and one thing to follow up on that insofar as judges are concerned, I think that's the reason it's important to elect people and have a few criteria. Number one, that these are people who are above reproach, that they are people who are going to enforce the law fairly. I think most members of the General Assembly who were attorneys, my friends who were attorneys, realized that I was going to be a lot tougher on them than I was anyone else. Because when I was a judge, it's just like I am as a member of the General Assembly. Getting reelected is not what drives me. That is what drives most people in the General Assembly. And the whole idea is for us to, if you do the right thing, more than likely you're going to get reelected. It's when you don't that you have a problem. And that's the problem that I have with judges and electing judges. It's the pool of candidates that we're getting is getting weaker and weaker. And there are any number of things that go into that, but that's something that troubles me.
Can I ask one really quick question about H 4456, the gerrymandering? And I'm just wondering if the recent Pennsylvania decision has given you any more confidence going forward with that?
Well, there's decisions like that. Ohio passed a bill that is a bipartisan. I haven't had a chance to really look at it, the bipartisan approach. And Lynn and I were discussing it before we started. It has issues with it. Once again, to try to get something that is perfect, it's almost impossible. I'm not going to give up on it, but it's almost impossible.
I think it's important to note, too, that the Pennsylvania decision was based on the Pennsylvania Constitution, so it has no direct legal implications for South Carolina. The League of Women Voters in Florida actually got the Constitution changed there, but they did it by having the power of a public referendum to put things on the ballot. We do not have that option in South Carolina.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Alexander.
Thank you very much. I have 2 points I want to make. A couple of weeks ago, when I got into the General Assembly, I went into my office and I had a copy of my map, my district drawn, with a note, any changes that you would like to make.
Wow. I didn't have that note on.
Well, I had that note on any changes you want to make. Wow. And so they're giving me the opportunity, if I suggest, to make some changes. And all of us, they gave us those maps to make sure that we are satisfied with how it's drawn, number one, and which I think is just crazy. And number two, for us as elected officials who constantly say, as politicians who constantly say, we need to get politics out of politics. Mm-hmm. It's really crazy. we just need to stop saying that. To say that we as elected officials, whether we appoint someone to draw the maps or not, to say we need to remove politics out of it, is really, really an insult to the people of this state. And we need to just don't even bring that up. In my mind, how are you going to do that? Even if we appoint someone to draw the districts, we are going to have some influence on them.
It doesn't matter who makes Terry.
That's my point. So for us to say, doesn't matter who makes the appointments, for us to say that we need to take politics out of politics. That's like trying to take blood out of plasma or something. How do you do that and make sense out of it? So I think we need to just change that whole concept of thinking, that whole concept of thought, and just deal with it. This is what it is, and figure out how we can minimize the political process that we are engaged in. Thank you very much.
What I said was,
I'm not saying you.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, let's take the politicians out of the process.
Well, how do you do that if we're going to appoint?
With the Citizens Committee.
Well, how do we do that if we're going to appoint the Citizens Committee?
You're not going to. It's going to be like a jury.
Who's going to appoint them?
Well, he's talking about a different bill.
We're going to talk about that when we have a reception as soon as we get through this question.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have 2 questions. My first question is referencing number 443.
4443.
4443, okay. Can politicians in South Carolina have accounts in other states and other countries that you're asking for reflection of, or it's just in South Carolina?
Just South Carolina.
That's leaving out other accounts in other countries and other states.
Maybe someone will amend the bill.
What's your next question?
So, hold on, sort of. I mean, that's getting weird legally. I mean, if I have a North Carolina, I think that it would apply to that, but it would be a lot harder to require disclosure, because the whole idea of, you're going to be able to hide from whatever you want to hide from.
The bill is not reflecting that accountability.
Well, it is the source and amount of your income. And I didn't envision limiting it to South Carolina. That was the whole purpose of it. So, you know, that'll be something that will be debated, but that is not the intent of my bill.
Because it's specific to the individual, it doesn't matter where it is. They technically would be in violation if they did not do that.
Make sure you sign up and we'll let you know when their hearing is on his bill.
Okay, all right.
You have another question?
My other question is, has anyone made a financial comparison? Because you're talking about how much it will cost in order to get a possible independent group. Because some states have done the independency in the past. Are we reflecting on how much it costs some of the other states to do the same thing that we might do in South Carolina, cost-wise?
Redistricting, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
That will be part of a physical impact study, and what we're going to do, the members of this commission would be paid mileage per diem for the meetings that they have, those things, but I'm not envisioning creating a bureaucracy of this because we have the RFA, the physical authority that has the map-making capabilities and that type of thing. And, you know, this is not something that would be a huge drain on our budget.
I'm just asking if it's been weighed one way or another.
No, ma'am.
How much it would cost, but I'm hearing some facts about it going to be a costly factor, a big costly factor.
I don't think so. No, ma'am.
The way the bill is written, it would be billed at the same rate, I guess, as other commissioners get. And when you consider how many commissions there are in the state and how many commissioners on all those commissions, this is not a huge increase.
But this will weigh out because it has, you know, more meetings than the regular commissions would have.
Well, stay tuned. We're going to keep you posted. You come to the subcommittee and argue your point.
This wouldn't
Thank
even
you, ma'am.
be crumbs underneath Thomas Ravenel's couch. It would be-
Yeah.
Don't push it on it. Okay.
Last question.
Thank you all so much. I definitely agree what you were saying about fair compensation, because I think that's very important to just really help everybody be compensated for the hard work they're all doing, but also get a really good pool of candidates as well. So I just have a few comments. I think it's real important as a representative to be vigilant of compensation that's coming in, even if it's not hard money, soft money. Being aware of things like, you know, trips or recognition or hotel stays, remembering that it's working for the people. So I'm thinking, for example, with, you know, automatic stay bill, which would take away people's rights to be able to get a stay on construction that might be environmentally harmful while the results of the study are being completed. So things that might affect people, but or people that you represent, even if they didn't necessarily vote for somebody. And I think Representative Cobb-Hunter, you mentioned at one point, you know, sometimes bills aren't read before they're voted on. So like mandatory story time where you have to like.
I like that one. I like it. I'll co-sponsor that one, absolutely.
And just basically realizing that it's a partnership between the people who are people holding the legislators accountable and the representatives also holding themselves and ourselves accountable. So, thank you.
Amen.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to suggest that this isn't the end. It's a good beginning, and the thing that we've got to have for the beginning is this bipartisan thing where we realize that there's more to citizenship than you know, party labels. And want to thank the representatives for coming, both sides of the table, and our advocates who are thankless and work for free. We're going to double Krangle's salary so he can pay his lobbying fine. But I want to encourage all of you, if you're not, get on our list outside. We only send out 2 emails a month, and if you're not a member, I'd suggest you become one. And that we have a reception across the hall that we're having to pay through the nose for, and there's a bucket there that's a little wooden bucket that is going to help defray the cost of using this facility. And really want to appreciate it, but y'all stay tuned because the work is up to us. We probably can't legislate it. We probably may not be able to litigate it. We're going to have to organize our way out of this mess. Thank you for coming.
I'm going to have to try it because I've got the city council and mayor from Clemson waiting on me.